My name is Max Moore. I am the Communications Director for BT and have been involved in cryonics actively since the mid-1980s. Our guest today is a very special guest, Dr. Emil Kendziorra, who is the leading force behind Europe's Tomorrow Biostasis and the European Biostasis Foundation. I won't go into the detail on his background because it's a very illustrious one, and he can certainly mention anything of relevance to what we're talking about, but let's get straight to the substantive issues. So thank you for being here, Emil. Appreciate your time.
No, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So the first question is, a major reason for you, I believe, to switch from anti-aging to cryonics is seeing a lack of progress in the anti-aging field. Do you believe that any existing treatments or practices are likely to extend people's lifespan by more than a few years?
Depends on what you mean by more than a few years. So I don't think they will do many years, right? Like I would be highly surprised if anything that is currently being researched adds more than, let's say, 10 years of maximum lifespan. So that would be a big surprise, and I'm happy to bet against it. I think like a couple of years, like 3-4 years, maybe, with a combination of things, right? The second problem, of course, being that we don't know which ones are the right ones. But I'm pretty sure that, 30, 40, 50 years down the line, we will probably know that these three things together would have done a couple of years. So I think there's a good chance of that. But more than that, I'm extremely cautious.
Okay, so we're on the same page with that. As you know, my cryonics is Plan A stuff. I think we're on the same page that we've been involved in this for a long time, not seeing the progress we'd like. So that makes biostasis especially important.
Right.
Okay, so to get down to specifics about the organization, probably most people know that Tomorrow Biostasis is based in Switzerland and Germany, depending on whether you want the facility or the office, and is expanding throughout Europe and has other plans. So can you tell us in what ways Tomorrow Biostasis is different from other cryonic service organizations in terms of offerings, capabilities, research, and so on?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So by and large, of course, the fundamental value proposition is the same, right? Cryopreservation, human cryopreservation. Then in detail, there's a couple of different things. So one of the things where from day one, what we wanted to improve is the ease of signing up for cryopreservation, right? So for me, signing up with Alco back in the day, for me as a German citizen, was very difficult. Took a long time, right? You really needed to have like strong conviction to push through all the paper contracts and so on. So when we started out, we thought there's probably a large amount of people out there who would sign up if just the hurdle would be slightly less, right? Where you can do it on a weekend, or you can do it in a day, or even half a day or a couple of hours. So one of the things where we fundamentally differ is that you can sign up with us again in a couple of minutes by now, right? Initial steps at least, right? It's all online. You sign digitally, right? You can have your cryopreservation contract with like an authorized signature online. You can fill all your insurance forms online. We work with one large insurance company that if you so choose, you can use that insurance company to have your cryopreservation funding in place, and so on. So everything is integrated into one step. And then the other main thing that we only do whole body field cryopreservation. So we do the whole procedure in the field remotely wherever the patient dies in our mobile operating rooms. We also do brain preservation, but the procedure is the same in both cases. And then there's a couple of additional details, at least in the field. We always do a perfusion via median stenotomy, right? Even though this is done in certain circumstances by other teams as well, we always do it. It's our standard procedure, and so on and so on. And of course, then initially we started in Europe, and in Europe we for a long time, and still am, we're the only organization that has teams on site in Europe, right? So there's a large range of differences that puts us apart.
Would you like to follow a little bit, for those who are not familiar, you talked about doing brain only. Alcor, of course, does neuro. How does what you do differ from that, and why?
Yeah, so initially we started out by just doing whole body preservation. So this was our standard and the only thing we offered. We added on neuropreservation because one of the pet peeves that we have is that cryopreservation, unfortunately, it's affordable for a good amount of people, but it's not affordable for everybody, right? So we would like to bring the price down over time, and we added brain preservation because for the time being, it is the only thing where we can reduce the price right now quite relevantly. We decided in the end for brain. So when Alco, of course, speaks about neuropreservation, it's basically the head. We do brain preservation only for two reasons. A, since the volume of a brain is even smaller than a head, so you can reduce the price further. And second reason here would be from a public communication standpoint, the Futurama head in a jar kind of thing. For if you want to broaden the appeal into groups that have not been involved in cryopreservation cryonics for the last 20 years, right? If it's new people coming into the field, a head in a jar is significantly weirder than a whole body or a brain. So a bit from a communication standpoint, it has the added benefit, even though this was not the main reason, to just say, yeah, we do brain preservation, just like a brain biobank, right? Which is very accepted by everybody.
Because it's curious that there does seem to be a big difference that the head, I guess, has connotations of the guillotine, and whereas the brain only seems like more of a science fictional thing. So I think it does make a difference.
Indeed,
yeah. And when I was at Alcor, we had one case where we actually removed the brain. That was a special case, Dr. Stephen Coles, and it was actually quite difficult. I think it was after we'd done the perfusion, and we had a pathologist there, but he said it was quite difficult. But I believe you have a different approach to removing the brain. So maybe you could talk about that and how you also protect the brain in storage.
Right. So when we do brain preservation, the procedure for whole body and brain is exactly the same. Same type of perfusion, so median sternotomy, aorta perfusion, and so on. Everything is the same, except for then in the very end, the brain is being extracted for long-term storage. So since at that point you have, and we do the procedure, it's called an anterior-posterior approach, where it's a certain type of, there's different types of how the brain can be extracted. In pathology, you usually do a bit more of a rough procedure, where if we want to go into details, where basically you just you cut the skull and then you kind of take the brain out from the front and then cut. We do a procedure that is an anterior-posterior procedure, as I said, which is usually done for education when you want to have like a perfectly preserved, like perfectly extracted brain for them to teach, med students, for example. So we do this procedure, which is surgically takes a bit more time, but then allows to extract the brain with less damage to the brain. And then, as anything, it's a training thing, right? So we train this procedure regularly, since it's our standard procedure. It's not something that we do once in a while. It's a standard procedure. So there's more training goes into it. And then from a storage perspective, it's very similar to any other cryopreserved, be it a human, be it neuropreservation or a brain. It has its own small pot, right? It's protected, in our case, with kind of like a wool-like structure, then a styrofoam-like material.
Dacron wool?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but we changed that recently. I'm not sure if we're still using that, but then there's a layer of styrofoam, and then there's a metal layer. And all of these things together, so these things are not being moved around anyway, right? They're in liquid nitrogen. So from a physical damage standpoint, not much can happen here.
All right. And it seems like another advantage that could be, from a public relations and family perspective, that if, I guess Catholics especially, but other people do viewings of the body, which seems a little peculiar, but that's popular. So in your procedure, presumably, it would appear undamaged.
The head?
Yeah.
Or the body? Yeah, there's gonna be some some cuts, right, like on the front of the head as well, basically here above the eye line. But if you suture them well, you still can make it so that it's presentable. Mm-hmm. Like even though open caskets, at least in the area where we are very, very, very rare. Mm-hmm. So it's not usually, it has never been a problem so far, and probably will not be an issue often, but in theory, you could still do it.
Yeah, I think those are probably going out of style. It seems like more of a Catholic kind of thing. And
Right, right.
yeah. I just want to say about the easy sign-up procedure, which we'll come back to a little bit, and the lower-cost neuro procedure. These things are important because the barriers to entry that people impose for themselves and that the industry imposes are pretty high. We complain about slow growth, so I think the fact that you're making that as easy as possible is certainly very important. Before we go on to talk about your possible expansion plans, maybe you could say a little bit more about your capabilities in terms of your emergency vehicles, your coverage in Europe right now, response times, that kind of thing.
Right. So we started out when we launched. We said we only want to cover areas where we can provide good quality of preservation. So Tomorrow Bio is not a worldwide company in regards to that. We do not allow worldwide signups. We cover worldwide. So if someone dies on vacation, we would still pick them up, of course. But we want to have a high concentration in a relatively small geographical area of members, and then in turn also cases. So we started in Europe. We by now cover all of Europe, and now we're expanding, and happy to discuss this, of course, more in detail as well. We have in Europe now 3 teams, or with 3 ambulances. So 2 of those are based in Berlin. One is in Switzerland, and then we have partner teams in other countries. Partner teams are usually volunteers for emergency, for the first step. We would not let them do perfusion, but they can do the initial cooling steps, right? And we are always happy to train them. So there's activity in Italy, in France, in the Nordics, in the Netherlands, and so on, where in an ideal case, we dispatch one of our mobile operating rooms to a patient. That would then be, in most cases, we dispatch the Berlin teams. 2 ambulances, as I said, we usually dispatch 5 people. 1 doctor, well, it's usually 2 doctors, but at least 1 doctor. One lead of the team, which is a doctor, then 1 assistant / also assistant surgeon, which is usually also a doctor, then 1 perfusionist, 1 support in the vehicle, and then 1 extra support for, for eventualities. So we bring two ambulances. Both are fully equipped for whole body field cryoprotection. We do dispatch 2 ambulances because you never know. A car might get into, it might be a car crash, a car might break down, something might break. You never know. We want to be sure that then, if for these eventualities we're ready. And since we want to anyway bring 5 people, we usually bring 2 teams. In short notice cases, of course, we also have flight kits. So then a team flies to the patient, while the local support team can support with initial cooling, while then the professional team is on the way. As I said, all these ambulances are equipped for whole body field cryoprotection. So they have all the stabilization equipment in it. They have all the perfusion equipment in it. They have all the cool down equipment, everything that you need to do the full perfusion with the cryoprotective agent, and then cool down to around -80 degrees Celsius with dry ice. And then while that is happening, you would already be on the way to Switzerland.
It's very impressive, the level of sophistication and development, the multiple vehicles, the teams. Maybe a question from the audience: how do you manage to do that when it's taken Alcor maybe decades to get to its stage, and you're already apparently more advanced than that, have more capabilities? How could you do that with so few early members? How can you afford to actually pay the staff and buy these ambulances?
So ambulances are surprisingly cheap. Like, they're not that expensive. I think there's 2 main parts. First, I think we've gotten relatively good. We have in-house engineers, right? We have in-house medical teams. We have in-house surgeons, right? So all of those on a per case basis are significantly more affordable than if you work with contract surgeons and so on, for example. Then we usually hire people who are willing to do, while they're on the downtime, we're willing to do other things. So, for example, Rishi, one of our surgeons, right? He also does he helps the engineering team build new stuff, design new things, outfits the ambulance, and so on. So we have these overlap positions because, of course, no organization has enough cases yet to to have teams like, every day of the year they're on cases. So I think that's one factor. And then on the other side, so I've built and run and then sold some tech companies before starting this thing. And some of that money went into starting this organization now, or these organizations, if we're more precise. And then we have been relatively successful convincing and engaging wealthy and like high net worth and ultra high net worth people to support that mission, right? By donation, by supporting with money primarily. So some of that money helped us, build all this infrastructure.
It's really remarkable that you were able to do that. Something like Cryonics, which is very hard to raise funds for, as we know. So it's very good that you do that. And I'm sure it helped that you have a background of building companies and selling them. I understand from something you read on your website, Tomorrow's website, that you're not planning on starting any more companies. This is it.
No.
This is your life's work now. Is that right?
Yeah. It was like, even though the plan was always that, not necessarily Cryonics, but longevity, right? Mm-hmm. So the other companies before I started. So when I graduated from med school, so I'm a doctor by training as well, right? And then did a lot of cancer research because I wanted to go into longevity. The reason why I started tech companies is not because I wanted to run tech companies per se. The reason was because I didn't find something back then that I felt like has high impact in the field of longevity, right? And when I say longevity, I don't mean like living healthy until 85 and then dying healthily at 85. I'm meaning living significantly longer, just, since the word longevity has lost a good amount of its meaning now.
Right.
And then when I looked again at the field while I was running my second tech company, I still didn't find there's anything that has high impact. So based on that, I decided for cryopreservation. And cryopreservation now is different, right? These organizations, they're not stepping stones. These are the organizations that, well, ideally I would like to run them and grow them and make the quality better until, well, unfortunately, I will be cryopreserved probably for a bit, hopefully. So yeah, they're very mission-driven organizations, very long-term, with very long-term planning and so on.
Okay. In the USA, we've had a number of organizations. We've had Alcor around since 1972, Cryonics Institute since 1976, and there's a few others that have tried to start up. In my view, and I have to give a disclaimer, I've been a member of Alcor since 1986 and was running the organization for almost a decade. But still, from my inside knowledge, I know that Alcor needs some competition at the very least. And I think it'd be very good to have more choices in the United States. So do you have plans to expand into the United States, and how quickly and what kind of coverage we'll be talking about?
Yeah, we do. And to be fair, we would even like some more competition, right? Because cryopreservation is not at a size yet where competition against the other organization is the main factor. The main factor is market education, right? Finding and learning how you even present this topic to people who have not thought about it for 10 years, right? So even we in Europe would like to have some more competition. So we started in Europe, as I said, initially because we didn't see there's a way of how we can cover the world with good quality. But now, since we have Europe pretty much well set up, for a couple of, now for longer, we had the plan to start in the US at some point and then go into other regions of the world. But of course, the US is the most advanced market in that field. From compared to other regions, most market education has already been done there. So I think it was a logical next step. And now we're launching in the US. We have, in fact, with a soft launch, launched in the US. So people in the US can now sign up, at least in certain states. And of course, there will be bigger announcement. We're collaborating there with a local organizations in the US to have teams on site. So everything, it will be basically the same. You do whole body field cryoprotection on site. And then once you've done that, then you have time and you would ship to Switzerland. Currently, we only have Switzerland storage, even though in the long run, the goal is to have multiple storage locations all over the world. And then the US, of course, would be a good second location for another storage location.
Right, but with economies of scale, you don't want to have a second building right now. Like even for alcohol, it's been around for half a decade, half a century. One has plenty right now. Yeah.
No, like even when we started Tomorrow and EBF, initially we thought like building a storage location is not really the thing that you need. You just need it because everybody wants to look at it, right? Everybody wants to know that you have it. But so we will. This is more like a long-term thing. We will, for a very good amount of time, apart from if there's some opportunistic, opportunities. Otherwise, we will focus on the procedures on SST for a good amount of time.
Do you think we've only tapped a very small part of the US market at this point, and how do you think you can reach beyond the current limits? Because we've been trying obviously for a long time, and there's been limited success. It's been a pretty slow growth. Do you think you can reach new people more effectively, and how would you do that?
We know that we reach new people in Europe, so we would initially just adapt our communications and outreach strategies that we've learned to do in Europe. We would expand them to the US, right? Just to give you a ballpark, right? I mean, we've been doing this now. Well, the organization has been around for a couple of years, but last year, 2023, was the first time when we did a case, right? We did, of course, training cases and so on, but the first time was the first half of 2023, where we did our first real cryopreservation that also went into storage in the end, right? And we started signing up members 2022, right? Or like that region. And now we have like north of 600 members, right?
And you have four cases at present, is that right?
We have a couple of more by now, so we always release them on an annual basis. We have like 6, 7 now. One still like not fully done, but incoming. But
presumably these are mostly last-minute cases. It seems like 2. Yeah. Unless you have very old members, it wouldn't be going that fast.
No, we don't. We in fact have very young members. So our average member is somewhere between 35 and 40, right? So it's usually people who last minute in regards to that they know that they're going to die when they come to us, when they find us. On the membership basis, so in a good month, right, we grow with like we have like a net growth of 20 to 30, even more members per month, right? So and these are not, we of course we know some people who switch from Alco or CI and so on to us, but that's a very small minority. Most people who sign up with us, they're either people who 5 years ago decided that they should do this at some point, that they should at some point sign up, and now they, we just, in quotation marks, push them over this last, let's now do it on the weekend kind of threshold. Or it is members who even are coming, who have known this topic from science fiction movies, but were never aware that this is something that you can actually do, right? So I don't know what the numbers are, but very, very few people switch over from other organizations. So most of those members are, they're new members.
It'll be interesting to see how that works out in the US, because you're presumably talking about Europe right now, since you're just barely starting in the US. It'll be very interesting to see how many people in the US switch. There's always people grumbling, but what would actually draw people, do you think, to switch from one of the existing organizations to Tomorrow Biostasis?
Yeah. So we're not primarily going for people who want to switch. Of course, if someone wants to switch, that's totally fine. But this is not our primary goal. Quite the opposite. We want the other organizations to also be successful and so on, because the field is small enough. So we're mostly going to go for people who know the topic, who might want to do it, but who've never gotten around to do it. If people switch over, I think whole body field cryoprotection is a good reason. I think, if someone wants to switch, I would argue that the quality data that we have released last year from the 2023 cases looks very good, like CT-based quality data.
We'll come to that as well, yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so that might be a reason to switch. But by and large, this is not something that we want to go after or will go after.
Right. Okay, so grow the market rather than take over the market.
Yeah, the market, so to make cryopreservation work, meaning that there's enough money to do revival research and so on in the field, right? Let's say I would Tomorrow Bio would collect all the other members from all organizations worldwide, right? Then we would get to somewhere around 5,000 members, maybe 5,500 by now. But these are not numbers that makes what I want to do possible, right? Like put real serious money into research. For that, you need 10, 20, 30,000 members worldwide, right? So our focus is, and I think the focus of every organization should be, how can we communicate a topic in a way where people who have not gotten around to do it now say, okay, now I do it. Because the field needs to pretty much 10x to then be large enough to put serious money into research.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there are people out there. It still surprises me because I've talked about this so much for so many years, but there are still people out there who have never heard about this, or they vaguely thought, "Oh, that's something from a science fiction movie, isn't it?" So even getting to that first step of this is a real thing, even that's a big step. Let alone maybe the repeat messaging you may need.
Yeah, I feel like I give like 2 interviews every week. And then I meet at some, I don't know, tech conferences or so, and I talk to people like who are super like deep in tech, right, and well informed. They're like, "Wow, this is possible." So there's still a lot of market education to be done.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so we talked about the ease of sign up, which is obviously a good thing in itself. But some might argue that by making the sign-up process easier by bundling it with term life insurance, that might come at the cost of long-term funding issues, obviously because term insurance is just for a limited term. How are you planning to deal with that to make sure people don't drop out later on?
Yeah, so our insurance can also do whole life, right? So term life is just a choice. They can choose between whole life and term life. So both is possible. There is a specific problem in Germany with German whole life insurances. And that's the reason why we in Germany have a bit more a bias towards term life. But this is a Germany or Europe in this specific insurance bias. In other insurances, this would not be an issue. The reason for that is whole life insurances in Germany, with the partner that we work with, they need to invest in very, very, very low risk assets. So, and the problem now is if you now, between 30 and 40, which our average members are, and now you put money into a whole life insurance, which invests in very, very low risk assets, then you underperform the market for the next 40 to 50 years, right? So, and this is a legal limitation of German whole life insurances. So they're just horrible financial products. And in most European countries, in fact, I'm not aware of any where this is fundamentally different. There might be some, but in most countries it is like that. So in Germany with that insurance, it's better to take a 30-year whole life. We then do a 30-year term life. We then do a lot to inform people that this is not their, do and forget funding method. We have in our CRM, we have like multiple markers when we ping people like 20 years, 10 years before their term life runs out to add another funding method. So it's much better to take term life in Germany. And now, of course, unfortunately, it comes down to personal responsibility. Put the rest of the money in some, robo-advisor or ETF or something. And the other thing is in the US, when you sign up in the US with us, we actively advise you to not use the insurance, our insurance partner. It's better in the US to take a standard US, universal health,
universal life, index universal life. Yeah.
For example, it's a much better financial product, and we would strongly advise, you can still use ours if you want to, but we would strongly advise to not do that. In Germany, for the time being, and in Europe, there is unfortunately not a better solution.
So it's just term and whole life, and there's no universal life of any kind.
No, it doesn't exist because there is like some laws that insurances need to be super, super, super safe. And technically speaking, if you in what universal index that they invest in the market, right? Technically, there could be, even though I'm not aware that this has ever happened, or at least not recently. There's a bit higher risk. So that's unfortunately the reason. So for our current members, we take the approach A, making sure they understand, and B, then have multiple touch points over their membership duration to make sure that they think about it and put other funding in place.
Is it possible for European members to take out US insurance with the the new other alternatives here?
It's not easy, unfortunately. Like, so usually taking insurance in other countries, the insurances don't do that because KYC, know your customers, and AML, anti-money laundering, is very difficult for them. So these
Currency risk as well, I guess.
yeah, so it's not easy. It's possible there are some insurances that do allow that, but it's not an easy approach, unfortunately.
And you actually have to come to the US to sign up to get the blood draw in person. That may be a requirement too.
Yeah, our insurance can do up to 400K without any physicals, at least in a standard path. But I think in the US, in a good amount of cases, you do need to do that.
Right. One of the good things about, I mean, I'm not really a life insurance fan, particularly because it's not a great investment, although some of them are a little bit better. But as you say, it does require personal discipline. But also there's another point that's actually in favor of insurance, at least in the US, it may not be the same there, which is that it is bankruptcy proof. So if you're building up your savings, you go bankrupt, that's all wiped out, but you can maintain your insurance policy. So that's something in favor. Does that work the same way in Europe?
Yeah. So there
it's
are some advantages in that regard.
Yeah. So a good strategy really is to get, well, if you start off with term, plan to switch to whole life, or if you can get US Universal Life, and to keep building that up. Because one thing we found, what we found at Alcor, for instance, is people are very bad at inflation planning. They act as if inflation doesn't exist. They sign up and say, well, when I signed up, it was $120,000. How dare you say I have to pay $200,000? Well, prices go up. It's just unrealistic to expect that price to stay the same. So apart from reaching out to people at various stages, as you mentioned, which is certainly a good idea, I think a strong message is that you have to plan for inflation, and maybe giving people an inflation planner that if we assume 2% or 3%, you have to do this. Of course, if they're investing on their own, that's less of an issue because they should hopefully be doing a bit better than inflation.
Right. No, like overfunding makes a lot of sense, right? Everybody should overfund their insurance a good amount even. The other, I still have not lost hope that you can actually grow this market significantly, that inflation to a degree can be counteracted by scale. Even though, of course, historically that has never been proven, so that would be a new effect. And then, last but not least, in Switzerland has comparatively always a very, very, very low inflation. So, and of course, it's cryopreservation specific inflation, right? CPI does not matter fully. It's basically liquid nitrogen. It's cost of building, which is kind of CPI-like, and personnel, of course, is pretty close to CPI. But nevertheless, due to Switzerland having very low inflation, there's some effects that counteract this necessity to plan for inflation, but it doesn't negate it. So you definitely need to plan for inflation.
Let's talk about the patient care trust. I know when we were discussing Tomorrow Biostasis early on, I said, well, one really strong thing about Alcor is the patient care trust fund. Whatever else is going on there, that's very important. And nobody else has actually ever had that until now. So tell us about Tomorrow's trust fund, patient care trust, and how it's similar or different from Alcor's.
Yeah, like a patient care trust is, I think, an absolute necessity. Like this, every organization should have that, right? So I think this is really important. And so our structure works very simple, like on a high level. So basically, there's three organizations, right? When you speak of Tomorrow, right, or Tomorrow European Biostasis Foundation, it's three organizations. It's Tomorrow Bio, here based in Berlin. It's the European Biostasis Foundation, and it's the Patient Care Foundation. And now, so kind of like it's a bit of a different mixing and matching who does what compared to other organizations. So Tomorrow does all the communication, all the contracts, and it has all the medical teams. The European Biostasis Foundation owns the building and does research funding, and the Patient Care Foundation just does money management and is the legal guardian of cryopreserved patients. Now, the general setup, I think, is similar-ish. Again, with a bit of mixing and matching, like different organizations do different things. Now, the Patient Care Foundation is a Swiss-based foundation. Has a specific tax ruling that it doesn't need to tax money that it gets. Can invest it and so on. It needs to just pay some taxes on the investment. Then by and large, it's the same general idea. The patient care trust decides, if Switzerland ever becomes unstable, it could decide to move all patients to somewhere else. The one thing that's, I think, a bit different, the patient care trust has a very long list of very, very strict rules of who you need to be and what you have needed to do prior to be eligible to be a board member of that patient care foundation, right? Because in the end, these foundations, they win or lose due to two factors. How are their governance statutes structured, and who are the people who execute that governance?
Right.
And both of these things are like, I wanted to have really, really, really strict rules. So basically, like it's stuff like you need to have been involved in the field for many, many years. Otherwise, you're not allowed to be elected there, and so on. So a long list of rules. Yeah, but I think generally the concept is similarish.
One of the rules that Alcor had was that, I can't remember what the percentage is now, a certain percentage of the directors of the PCT had to have relatives or loved ones who are cryopreserved. Now, obviously, that's not feasible for you at this point because you don't have enough patients. But is that kind of a guardrail that you would consider in the future?
Yeah. So when we go a bit into the detail of the patient care foundation, it has kind of two governance bodies. It has a management body and it has a kind of like a board-like body. And the reason why we did it like that, one of these two bodies needs to have patients in it once we have needs to have relatives of patients in it once a certain amount of patient numbers has been reached. And the other government body does not allow, no one is allowed to have a patient, a relative in the patient's there. And now, of course, we're thinking it's very detailed game theoretical considerations. What's ideal here, right? The idea is that technically, under certain circumstances, having a relative in the patient can be a downside. Because now, in emergency situations, there could be circumstances where the board member that has a relative in it would prioritize the cryopreserved relative over the other people. In other circumstances, it is an upside, right? Because you really care that everybody and everything is stable. So we have these two government bodies that kind of control each other to a degree and mitigate that risk and kind of try to get the best of both worlds here. So we do have that in a part.
I'm not sure how that would work. That if someone would prioritize their own relative, because you can't really just pull one person out, right? You'd be moving everybody at once. But.
No, you can, right? Let's say Switzerland, for whatever reason, is geopolitically unstable now, and the Patient Care Foundation decides that every cryopreserved patient now needs to be moved in an emergency procedure to another country, right? And now, someone goes first, some doer is transported first, right?
Right, it wouldn't be like we only move that relative and nobody else. But yeah, obviously it could affect.
No. But there are emergency situations. Let's say, I don't know, for whatever reason, wherever you have your storage facility, no liquid nitrogen can be produced anymore, right? Or you could think of very, very unique emergency situations where there is some order of moving and where there's a chance that whoever is the last patient to be moved might not make the cutoff, right? So there could be these situations, and cryopreservation and building a governance for these kinds of things is thinking about a lot of very low probability eventualities. So in these very low probability eventualities, and I'm not saying there's anything where I see a reasonable chance that any of those would become reality anytime soon, right? In those circumstances, I think you can improve governance a bit by having that structure that we've built.
Well, it's certainly good to have that kind of foresight and advanced planning. As you say, when you're talking about long periods of time, unlikely events become more likely. So if you're going to be around for 50, maybe 100 years, things where you say, oh, that's not likely to happen, it's not worth bothering with, become worth bothering with.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Okay, when people apply for a job, they usually ask to say what mistake they've made and how they would fix it. So let me do something a little bit like that. What are Tomorrow Biostasis' biggest flaws and deficiencies, and if you have any, and what plans or actions do you have to mitigate them, if any?
I mean, in the past, what are our biggest flaws? I think we could have been. I think we could have figured out how to communicate the topic faster. I feel like we're always too slow, even though we might be like other people might say we move fast, but like I have this like I kind of want to be. I want to be faster. Um, I think we could have. So in the very beginning, we made some rounds
You've
of
frozen
setting
again
up.
on my end. Hopefully you can still hear me.
I can
There
hear
we
you
go.
just fine. Yeah.
Okay, you're
No,
back
I
again,
can
yeah.
always hear you just fine.
You could have added focus, so I guess your bandwidth might be dropping.
But it's anyway doing this asynchronously, so it's uploading
Yeah.
even on my side locally. So I think it should not be an issue for the recording
Okay,
in
good.
the end. Okay, so let me say that again. So in the very beginning, we just started the organization out as just one foundation. It was just one non-profit foundation in Switzerland, and then all the structure. So we could have been a bit faster on building our structure that we have now. I think the structure now is pretty good. And what do we do to mitigate? Like I don't know. Like get feedback from the field, right? I think in close contact with everybody, both from research and so on, who is in the field. Yeah, like I don't know. I think we're pretty fast in fixing mistakes, so things that we can improve. I think we're pretty fast in that regard.
Well, I think you're pretty fast overall. I mean, compared to the way the industry moves, which is generally very slowly and seems to have slowed down, at least in the United States, in terms of new procedures and improvements, you're moving pretty fast. So, yeah, I think one of the biggest weaknesses will be, and it's not really a weakness in your case because you were able to raise a lot of money, but obviously the weakness in some sense is the number of members, but that's rapidly growing. So eventually that will be a strength, hopefully, rather than the weakness.
No, I think members is going to grow pretty fast. I think we're going to lag for a good amount of time and for patients, right? Just because of the age difference of our members, like we're not going to have like 100, 200 patients in the next year, right? We're probably going to need a couple of years to catch up in that regard. Even though we have a lot of requests from these last minute cases now, so it might be faster than I think, but that I assume will take a bit longer.
One very important bit of talking about improving and avoiding problems. One very important thing to me is being transparent and open about procedures, having published protocols, having case reports out there, and having people discuss the case reports and be able to give feedback. Now, I think so far you've done a very good job on that. You've got case reports out promptly. You did a few months ago, you did a video review of those cases, and people would call in and discuss them, which I think is excellent. That's something that other organizations, I think, could learn from. So one part of the feedback is called CT scans, which is something, as far as I know, has never been done at CI. Maybe there's been some exceptional case. We started doing that at Alcor. Since I left there a couple of years ago, that seems to have stopped. The CT scanner we bought a few years ago doesn't seem to be operational, and for some reason they're not taking them out to the imaging lab nearby. It's pretty important. Are you doing CT scans routinely? Do you have an in-house scanner? And how are you reporting on that?
Yeah, so both. So every case we do get CT scanned. We have an in-house medical grade scanner bought from a hospital supplier that is directly next to our operation room. It's like, in fact, in our operation room. So every case gets scanned post perfusion, and then it's one of our main quality metrics. It's not enough of a quality metric, though, right? So what a CT scan basically shows you is that you have gotten enough cryoprotective agent in ideal cases in every part of the brain to not allow ice crystal formation there. What a CT scan does not show you, it does not show you how the ultrastructure of that brain looks, like how the fine structure, like the cellular structure, how that looks. So going forward, we will of course continue to do CT scans because this is the most established quality metric. But we do plan to add other quality metrics, including electron microscopy for ultrastructure preservation, to check that as well. That will be a process, right? So this is not fully established yet, and how, and at least not in our facility. And I I think no one has done that before, except for in research cases. But CT scanning is very important, and so is the reports. Like we do all reports always for the prior year, all reports together, and then we host an online webinar where people can join and ask questions, and we run through them and explain how stuff has been done, and why, and what the results were, and so on, and how we mitigated problems, right? So there's always some problems, what we do to solve them problems for the next case. And then, give time for comments and questions and so on.
I think it's important to have a commitment to doing this publicly as much as possible, too, obviously within the constraints of privacy and patient confidentiality, because you can do these things internally, but if you don't open this up to a wider audience outside the immediate organization, you may not get as much feedback as you need. It's easier to shut down voices within an organization. So I think having that public review is definitely very important.
Absolutely. I think it's highly important. And we don't release any personal identifiable information. It's just the case data. It's just what has been done, what were the results, the graphs, the CT scans, and so on. You can do that without releasing any personal information.
And you mentioned that, as you say quite correctly, the CT scans don't really tell you a certain amount. They have to show how well you've perfused, but they don't really tell you anything about the ultrastructure. So, this is something we discussed some years ago at Alcor, and it was very controversial. And of course, given typical board of directors, you can't reach agreement on this. There's people saying, well, the members will be upset if you take brain samples without permission. The contract actually says we can do that, but that hasn't been done except in the one case of Dr. Stephen Coles, who hopefully Greg will be talking about maybe at the conference in a week. We'll see. Finally publish a paper on that. That was one case where brain samples were taken, electron microscopy studies were done, and the results look, apparently, according to Greg Fay, extremely good. So is this something you'll be doing on a regular procedure? And if so, how do you reassure members who don't want bits of their brain taken out?
Yeah, so I don't think you should do this without consent. So what we do, we get explicit consent from members that are okay with that, right? Of course, it's a microsample. It's very small in like neurology operations, neurosurgery operations. Microsamples are taken as well, right? So it's not crazy bad, but some people might say, I don't want this, right? Of course, you can also take them from areas that are not that important, like the spinal column and so on, to at least get some better data. So you can do a lot of things, and we have already some people who have agreed to do that, like who had no problems at all with allowing us to do that. So long story short, no samples are being taken from anybody without them giving explicit consent. And of course, our hope would be that enough people give explicit consent to then be able to correlate these results to ischemic time, right? Because currently what you would do, the ultrastructure, you can predict the ultrastructure based on SMIX, which is the standardized measurement of ischemic exposure, which is basically means how long was the brain not exposed, didn't have the brain enough oxygen, and at what temperature. So the hope would be then, if you have enough samples, you can correlate that to procedures, and then you don't maybe need to do it for everybody to get a good understanding of how the ultrastructure would look in a good amount of cases.
Yeah, so far, even though there's been a few hundred cases, a lot of those haven't been published. So we're really looking at a pretty small sample right now, and obviously we need a larger sample to really learn things. I think the meta-analysis project that Ashwin and Michael have done is very valuable from that point of view, but I'm not sure how much new information will be put into that. But hopefully you'll be part of that project, and we can keep updating these measures of quality. What do you say is the most promising research developments for biostasis, both in terms of improving preservation and in terms of revival? And do you think it's too soon to start thinking about revival research?
No, I think it's not too soon to think about it. I still think there's a lot of significantly lower hanging fruits on the cryopreservation side of things. So I think about this topic kind of in the following way, right? So I kind of have these three buckets of how we think about it. So one is very tangible, low-hanging fruits, stuff that you can do right now and that helps the next patient who is being cryopreserved, right? So the biggest topic here would be how to handle ischemia better. In every cryopreservation case, there's a certain amount of ischemia. A certain amount of time, the brain was not supplied with oxygen well enough. right? And on average, there's a relevant amount of ischemia. For logistical reasons or for, mostly for logistical reasons. And then also, of course, procedure reasons. So one of our core research projects over the last couple of years and also going forward is, assuming we have some amount of ischemia, because on average you do have that, how to adapt the procedure in a way to mitigate that effect of ischemia as much as possible. So these low-hanging fruits, even though ischemia handling is not technically low-hanging fruit, but it is something, if you would find a solution right now, or you have an idea that works in the lab, you could implement it and it would directly help the next patient. That also includes surgical procedures. We do nasopharyngeal cooling, right, which increases the cooling rate, and so on. So these kinds of things. The second thing would also fall under that category is logistical improvements. Having more teams, having hospitals that you partner with, and so on and so on. Then the second bucket is stuff that would be breakthroughs, that like not necessarily revival type breakthrough, but like stuff that would really change the game, like better cryoprotective agents, like a cryoprotective agent that is less toxic, still a good glass former, that is well perfusable, right? And
not
so
too
on.
expensive.
Not too expensive,
yeah.
right?
For
Stuff
whole body
like
especially.
cryoprotective agent with blood-brain barrier modifiers, so that under low ischemic conditions, the cryoprotective agent gets out from the vessels into the tissue where you actually need it. Because normally the blood-brain barrier under low ischemic conditions stops at least parts of the cryoprotective agent from getting into the tissue. It goes slow. These types of things. So this would be the second bucket. Things that would really change the game.
And just a comment on that briefly. Another reason for doing the blood-brain barrier opening is that it enables you to get better electron micrographs images, right? Otherwise, you're going to get these very dense images that are hard to interpret, and people won't be very impressed with them when you're talking about brain preservation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the last bucket would be like this stuff like revival. Like not of a human, of course, anytime soon, but some organism that is larger than C. elegans, right? And ideally, of course, a mammal, like a rat or a mouse. I don't think this is something that is like super like close around the corners. There might be some technology that is kind of a Hail Mary. Maybe if all the pieces fall into place, maybe this can be done hopefully sooner than we think, but this is still pretty far out, I think. But nevertheless, I think it makes sense to put some amount of resources and time into it. But I would say currently it's maybe, in our case, maybe 5 to maybe 10%, but not that much. Like most of our focus, our overwhelming majority of our focus is improving cryopreservation technology, taking people into cryopreservation, and not yet what would be possible or what would be needed to take them out.
All right. Yeah, you mentioned logistics improvements. That sounds like a kind of a boring, dry thing that's not very high tech, but it's actually extremely important in cryonics.
Super important. Yeah.
You've got to get to the people as fast as possible. It seems to me with revival technologies, a lot of that will happen regardless of us, because people are going to want to do tissue regeneration, not regardless of biostasis. They want to have tissues regenerate, organs regrown, and obviously anti-aging. So a lot of that stuff will probably happen regardless. But we may need something more sophisticated, but at least we've supported Robert Freitas with his nanomedicine book and his biostasis revival. So that's and he of course has several hundred research projects he lists at the end of the book that we could tackle as well.
Yeah, and that's these kinds of things are, for example, super meaningful things in that field, right? Because you can point to something, you can show a plan, you can even start executing on part of that plan, right? But I think that the attention, the focus should still be very much on cryopreservation.
Let's talk a bit about ITS, intermediate temperature storage. This is something that, again, when I was at Alcor, some people wanted to do this. Personally, I wasn't convinced it was that important, but I thought that's something we should offer, but we never managed to do it for various internal reasons. Is that something you're going to offer, and what's the costing on that compared to a standard form of cryopreservation storage?
Right. That's something that is coming up. So we have a prototype that is currently being developed with one of our partner labs. That should be done this year. So it should be delivered to Switzerland sometime this year. Then we would test it, and once that technology is sufficiently tested, then we would go and offer that. What it will cost exactly is not yet totally clear due to two factors. Well, the prototype doer with this ITS technology was very expensive. So the question is, how much can you bring the cost down to build these doers? And then the second question is, how high is the liquid nitrogen consumption? The liquid nitrogen consumption is likely higher than with an immersion doer, but the question is how much. And then last but not least, it might require more maintenance. It might require more time from the personnel, which altogether will bring the cost up. How much? I don't know yet. But we will then, once we have that data, we will offer for people to sign up for that or switch. And if it is possible that or for the case that it's not that much more expensive, we might in the future go towards just doing ITS, that ITS becomes the standard. But it's too early to say.
Now, with these ITS designs, generally the idea is that if they fail, they should fail downward. In other words, rather than the patient warming up, they go down to liquid nitrogen temperature. You would lose the benefit, but you wouldn't lose the patient. But how important, in your view, is it to avoid the kind of cracking this is intended to avoid? How effective do you think it is, and how much does that matter in terms of eventual repair?
Yeah, so I think in relative terms, it's less than other things. So it matters less than other things probably. So it probably matters less than reducing ischemia. It just directionally. The reason for why I think ITS development still makes sense, because ischemia under certain circumstances, it's outside of your control, right? It's up to the hospital. If the hospital doesn't cooperate and if the hospital doesn't hand out bodies at 3 a.m. in the night, right, then what are you going to do about it, right? There's very little that you can do. Whereas ITS, the question of ITS or immersion comes at a time when pretty much everything is within your control, right? So it might be not compared to other things. Other things might have a higher impact on chances of revival, even though it's very tough for me to say that in how much higher. But I think due to the fact that it is within your control, it still makes sense to do it.
Okay. Well, since Tomorrow seems to be very open to exploring new procedures, like whole body field cryopreservation and so on, one thing that has been discussed in the last couple of years is in thinking about the different situations when you get patients, the different levels of ischemia. There's some interest now in a combination of cryopreservation and chemical preservation, which goes by the somewhat awkward name of vitrifixation. Is that something you're considering offering, and in what kind of circumstances?
So we do this right now already. So this is under certain circumstances. So when I think about cryopreservation procedures, I think it's not a good idea to say we have this one procedure and we only do this and we never go away from it. We never change, right? More so, I imagine that down the line, the specific procedure will very much adapt based on how much ischemic equivalent you all have, right? Warm and cold ischemia. So under certain circumstances, you pretty much cannot perfuse with cryoprotective agent anymore. Or if you would, you probably would do more damage than good. So at that time, historically, basically people did a straight freeze. Just everything's frozen. But of course, the damage of straight freeze is relevant. So under certain circumstances, it is probably better to just switch to immersion vitrifixation, where you would do a chemical fixation first to stop the time. Chemical fixation you can do pretty quick because the chemical fixative diffuses very quickly, and you could even perfuse it or cannulate the ventricles to have inside and out and so on. So you can do a couple of things. And then you do immersion-based cryoprotection after. We had some brain cases where we just completed that. So actually one of the case reports that you see from last year is an ongoing immersion vitrifixation case. We now have the final data, which will be released soon. The case report last year was a preliminary one because the procedure was not done yet. Because the procedure, the immersion cryoprotection takes 13, somewhere between 12 and 13 months. So it's very, very slow. But since it's already fixed, it's already chemical fixed, it doesn't matter that there's no degradation during this time, or no relevant degradation. So you can take the time. And then, of course, before you cool down, you actually need to do the cryoprotection first, because otherwise you know, the like cooling down a just fixed brain doesn't look good. Yeah, so the CT scans again look good. So what we're going to release there, it's going to look good. To be fair, here a CT scan again doesn't tell you that much. It tells you that you did the cryoprotection procedure well, but it doesn't tell you anything about what happened prior to the cryoprotection.
Did you
meaning,
take
for
samples?
example, ischemia.
Did you take samples in
No,
that case for? Yeah,
no.
no. Okay.
The reason is we originally, when we started out, we thought that will need more time to optimize based on CT scan, right? Because if the CT scan is bad, the ultrastructure is also bad. If the CT scan is good, you technically cannot say if the ultrastructure is good or bad, but the CT scan being good is a prerequisite. Right. So since we thought we need more time to optimize that, which turned out now that we're significantly faster than, like, they all look good, meaning that we did not in the past ask for consent to take samples. So no, unfortunately, we don't have samples.
When I started trying to organize cryonics in England back in mid-1980s, there were just a few of us. It was pretty difficult. Nobody understood what we were doing. But we were really driven to do it because there was no organization in England. It's a long way from the United States, California in particular. Yeah. So we were driven to do it. A lot of people have tried to start local groups. Many of them have not really done well. They've kind of just become maybe talking groups. There are very few who actually get together and do regular trainings and organize themselves. So what would you say to someone who's determined to create a local cryonics organization or capability or SST capability? Can you assist them? Is there certain things you look for?
Yeah. No, we're absolutely happy to. I think the one thing, and we do this in Europe, right? We do this with multiple teams, as I said in the beginning, like in the Nordics, in France, in Italy, in Poland, in like multiple locations, in Israel now as well, and so on. So we're more than happy to help and advise, and if people want to come over, everybody can come over to us, and we train them. Right? If you want to come to Berlin and have a training with us, we're more than happy. We do those regularly anyway, right? And we're happy to train you in all the procedures up to very complex stuff, but that requires then a relevant amount of time investment on the person's side. I think the main thing is, like, you need grit and tenacity and staying on it. Like there was in Europe as well. There was a lot of talk in the past, like this idea of doing something in Switzerland. I didn't start that. Like this has been around for like years and years and years.
Right, we had a big meeting like 5 years ago with people from Europe and Germany and various countries, and had actually quite a detailed plan as well, but it didn't really become anything.
Yeah, so the requirement is always one person who drives it forward. Mm-hmm. Like there needs to be one person, and at some point here in Germany and Europe, and I said, okay, I'm down to do it, and I can do it full time, and so on. So if there is one person in a country that says, yes, I'm willing and able to drive this forward for the next years, that's an ideal case for us to be super happy to support. And of course, it doesn't cost anything. Like if you want to be trained at us, we happily do that for free, right? And all the advice as well, under one circumstance. If there's a case that where you can help, you need to help. Right? So if there's a case close by and for whatever reason, for logistical reasons, we're not there yet, then you need to the best of your abilities, of course, like you need to help. But under those circumstances, we're more than happy to help. And yeah.
When I was visiting Tomorrow 2 or 3 years ago, I'm not sure the first of the meetings you had, I remember there was a lot of interest from people in various places in Europe who said, I want to do something, I want you to help. And I remember you being very firm in saying, I'll talk to you, but only if you're serious. And so, yeah, as you say, you have to find the right person who's got the drive and intelligence to actually push this forward.
Yeah, not all of these groups continued on, but some groups that were there back then, like a couple of years ago, like 2 years ago now maybe, or something like that, they're still active. So I mean, everything can always work better, but at least I'm cautiously optimistic that down the line there will be relatively well-trained teams in multiple countries in Europe, in addition to our professional teams.
Now, when looking at Tomorrow, there's a strong impression that this is talking about the single person driving things. This is an Emil thing. You really started it. You're driving it forward. Your name is strongly associated with it. You do a lot of videos, which are really good at explaining things. So people might wonder, who else is on the team here? Someone specifically asked me to ask you about your co-founder, Fernando Azevedo Pinheiro, what he does on a daily basis, other people on your team. So what is the size of your team? What's the background? And what do they do
Yeah.
under your guidance there?
Yeah. So yeah, Fernando is my co-founder. So in these kinds of organizations, in like smallish organizations, we're somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 12 people at Tomorrow, and then EBF has mostly board members, and that's extra. Usually, you kind of you have an internal focused person and an externally focused person, right? I'm of course more the externally focused person. Fernando is more the internally focused person. So he will be. You see him in on like he's more active on Discord, right? He a lot of these emails come from him. He builds a good amount and oversees a good amount of the tech, right? So all this digital signing up stuff. We now have member logins, right? All of our members now have like member dashboards where they can log in and upload their files.
That's a good idea.
And download their down the line they will be able to put out videos where they can say, yeah, I really want to be cryopreserved. They can update their patient advance directive, their last wills, all of that themselves. They can change their payment, like whatever, all of that, whatever you can imagine there. So he builds that kind of stuff. He's way more in all the billing and so basically I do more the external stuff and
you do the fun stuff and he does the boring internal details.
If I need to go to do 5 interviews a week and travel to 3 different countries, it's a question of perspective. I'm sometimes very happy to just go to the office in the morning and go home at night. So that's So we work very closely together while I'm more focused on external and medicine and research stuff. And he focuses more on operations, communication, and all of that stuff. And apart from that, we have we have in some of those videos, Rishi. Some of you might know one of our doctors, right? We just hired another EMT. We have Thomas, a perfusionist, right? We have Felix, who runs our marketing. We have Alessa. We have Sako, who some of you might have also seen in videos, who runs engineering. We have Jeb. We have William, who some of you might know from customer emails. He takes care of all the customer care. We have Fiorella. So a broad set of people, basically in, I would say, like 3 or 4 big groups: engineering, medical, like logistics, internal communication, overhead, and so on, and communication and outreach.
So that's a very good number of people, a lot of staff to have at this early stage. That's encouraging.
Yeah.
Let me just go back a little bit to one point I meant to ask about when we talked about vitrifixation. One concern has been traditionally, and it may refer to earlier forms of chemical preservation perhaps, but one concern has been that once you have that cross-linking of the molecules in place from chemical preservation, that it's basically irreversible except using more advanced technology. Would you give some thoughts on that as to whether you think to what extent that's true? Maybe it doesn't matter. Just address that concern for people.
Yeah,
we're just talking about people who want to be. We're not talking about people who want to be uploaded because that's not really a problem for them. We're talking about people who actually want to be revived in their original biological body.
Yeah. So of course, everything I'm saying in this regard is always speculative, right? I mean, I don't know. So the point is the following. So we do immersion vitrifixation in conditions where otherwise you would do straight freezes, right? So maybe I didn't say that clearly. You cannot sign up with us to say you want to do immersion vitrifixation, right? The standard procedure under low ischemic and mid ischemic or like some amount of ischemia conditions is vitrification in our case. And then there's this middle ground where perfusion doesn't make sense anymore and you would actually do more damage under certain circumstances, where we do immersion vitrifixation. So if you wouldn't do immersion vitrifixation in those cases, you would need to go for straight freeze. So I would argue that there's a good probability that immersion vitrifixation, the cross links that you have with sufficiently advanced technology, are easier to break than to fix all the damage that straight freeze might do. And of course, again, this is directionally, this is very difficult to say, but that is the argument behind it. And I think the argument is supported by, it's never all, but I think it's by an overwhelming majority of the scientists in the field would probably agree with that. So that's why we do it. And now coming back to the question, I think the crosslinks in general can probably be broken in the future. At least you would not have all the structural damage that straight freeze does.
Yeah, it would be surprising if you couldn't cleave these bonds, but you could do detailed repair of the tissues. It seems like if you have that capability, then breaking the bond should be fairly easy by comparison.
Exactly. So I think that is the core argument here. So yeah.
Just to clarify one point, because you talked about middle cases, so it sounds like you're saying basically you don't use this procedure, emission fixation, in a case where you'd otherwise be a straight freeze. Are there any cases where you might use it if there's going to be a very long transport time or your vehicle is not available? Are there sort of in-between cases where it wouldn't be a total straight freeze, but kind of dubious? Or is there a pretty clear line in your view?
No, there's no clear line. This is like the line is an active research line that might very much move. So basically, we do vitrification with perfusion, immersion vitrifixation, straight freeze. There are certain circumstances where even probably immersion vitrifixation takes too long and you don't want to drop the temperature immediately. Or immersion vitrifixation is not logistically possible, right? Because there might not be a team on site and so on. So, but and these lines, they're not clear. Unfortunately, very little things are totally clear in cryopreservation. It's such an active, it's not fully true, of course. There's things that have a very high or good supporting evidence. But a couple of things, especially these timing issues, there just aren't enough cases to really decide these timing issues with a high degree of scientific certainty.
Right. Small numbers again, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming towards the end. So I wanted to ask about the quality and reliability of the Tomorrow Biostasis app. Now, one of the big challenges, of course, in talking about ischemic delays is getting notified quickly when the body fails. I'm never quite sure what to say. I don't want to say when they die, but when they clinically die, we want to know about that as quickly as possible. And there's been some very interesting developments in terms of smartwatches and systems. So, and I know that I think Cryonics Institute has a very simple one that basically just tells you who to contact. Alco has a check-in one, which checks in every 24 hours, which is better than nothing. What does your app do, and how well do you think it works, and what do you see in the future for that?
Yeah, it's an alpha version. So, like, if someone wants to be an active tester, they can use it. But we would definitely not recommend this in like trusted or anything like that. So it's in active development. In fact, if someone is a React Native developer, we're happy to have some people join the project. So reach out. So the app, basically what the app does, it is a time-based system. So it's a Deadman switch, basically, timer, that then has so basically it's a server-sided Deadman switch that if it's being triggered, it sends out last known GPS position, documents, and so on to emergency contacts that the people themselves can put into the app. And now there's a certain different types of triggers that reset the Deadman switch. One is just time-based, meaning you need to click a button, right? One is smartwatch or Oura Ring based, like anything that gives you pulse data. In fact, we use movement data as well, and other Apple Health and Google Fit data that resets the Deadman switch on the server. But I would not currently use it.
How do you deal with people taking the device off and on? Is that a problem? That doesn't think you're dead just because you're taking your watch off?
Yeah, so it is. It's like false positives and false negatives are absolute problems, and I think that will take a good amount of time to iron them all out. So when the app on the phone on the client side detects a problem, it's not sending an immediately emergency signal out. So there's an escalation, like a cascade of escalation. So first it turns on an alarm and says, "Are you fine?" Right? then it sends you a text message. So there's multiple steps before an emergency signal goes out, which can mitigate that to a degree. Yeah.
Well, final question, well, you can certainly add any additional thoughts, is thinking about fundraising. We've been working together on doing some fundraising. It's very difficult. You've been very successful in raising funding for Tomorrow. But in terms of research, what are the difficulties in bringing in funding for that, and what do you think the prospects are in the next few years? Given the whole increasing talk about life extension, can we ride that wave?
Yeah. No, like so for context, Max, Ashwin, and I, we started the Biostasis Development Fund, basically an organization that is there to fund new research in the field as an independent, non-related to any of the organizations that we might be involved in. Funding is, so it's indeed very, very difficult to raise funding for this field, right? And so we've been relatively successful bringing in new people who've never funded anything in cryonics before to be interesting enough in the field to say, at least I give some money. Usually they give very small amounts, like 25,000, 50,000, 100,000. So these $1 million people, we don't have many of those either. We have some large-scale supporters on the side of the European Biostasis Foundation, and we're very grateful to them. But on the Tomorrow side, what we currently do, we find a lot of people who give small amounts. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying, of course, 50,000 is not technically a small amount, but for research, unfortunately, it is a small amount. Like research, unfortunately, is always extremely expensive. We have some larger funders, but by and large, it's like smaller tickets put together. In the end, I don't think I have a perfect solution there yet. It's just a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of putting time into it to build these networks, talk to people, and then sometimes we have people who say, "Yeah, of course I want to put some money." It's an amazing thing. I have some of our members who, at the end of the call, they say, "Are you guys also looking for money?" I'm like, yeah, let's talk. But I think unfortunately in this field, the fundraising approaches cast a very, very wide net, talk to as many as people as possible, and then some people say, yeah, I definitely want to, I'm interested, definitely want to put down some money.
Okay, well, I know your time is limited and I have to go soon. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything we haven't talked about in terms of plans for the future, new developments? Any more details on the USA expansion?
Yeah, like, so if you're in the US or any other country for that matter, in Europe or the US, and you're interested in signing up, feel free to reach out to us. Like, at least we're also, of course, happy to have a call. We have like a lot of people who take calls to just explain what we do, how we do it, and so on. So free to reach out. You can technically sign up in the US through our system as well, but we would recommend reaching out and understanding how everything works there in detail. No, apart from that, everybody who has cryo-procrastinated for the last couple of years, next weekend or like next days is a good time to sign up. No, but apart from that, I think we covered the topic quite well.
Okay, well, I appreciate your time, Emil, and your very informative answers. And I look forward to seeing you a week from now in Miami.
Absolutely. See you there, and thanks a lot for the invitation.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.